I'm Margaret, and welcome back to the 12 Days of Christmas. Today we're going to be creating these beautiful little sachets, and the technique that we're learning is a crocheted or a lace look edging that's done on the sewing machine or on the serger. These are just fabulous little sachets, and the technique can be used on a variety of different projects. So some of the things you're going to need for this, we're going to talk about now. Everything is listed in the PDF file, so go ahead and print that out. But you're going to need your fabric for the sachet bags. You're going to need water-soluble stabilizer, and we're going to be working with 4 layers of stabilizer for this. We want it to be really well stabilized. You're going to need some ribbon to tie your sachet at the end, and you might want to use some fray check to keep the ribbon from fraying, and I'll show you a trick on how to keep that soft. We're going to be using a top stitch needle, size 90, or if you need to go a little bigger you could, but a size 90 worked great for me. And you're going to be using a 12 weight thread. Now the threads that I have used are either sulky 12 weight cotton or a thread called Cotty, and it's about a 12 weight also. And these work great. They go in the needle and they go in the bobbin. So gather up all of your supplies and let's go ahead and create this beautiful crochet look edging. So we're going to thread in the needle a 12 weight sulky thread, and this is 100% cotton, or a Cotty thread, and that's 100% cotton also. So you want something that's like a 12 weight. And you're going to wind a bobbin with it, and I wound my bobbins on the sewing machine regular. I just went ahead and slowed the speed down a little bit. And then I put my bobbin in my regular bobbin case, just like I'm sewing regular, and I threaded the needle just like I normally thread my machine when I'm doing a project. I did put on a size 90 top stitching needle. Now the first thing I can tell you is you're going to have to test, because it's going to be different on every machine with every thread, so there's a lot of variables. But basically this is what we're doing, and it's easier to see when you use a variety of threads. So my first row was green, my second row was kind of a rust color, and my third row is the red. We're going to do a little added stitch on the end of our fabric, and then we're going to use the same color over and over, but I wanted you to see what it actually looked like on individual rows. So I've gone ahead and I have my fabric cut to the size of my little sachet. I folded under the top edge 2 times and just stitched that down so I have a nice finished edge. I'm working with 4 layers of water-soluble stabilizer, and the first thing I want to do is a zigzag stitch. Now if you have a machine that allows you to put stitches in your memory, like a little folder, because we're going to be going back and forth, go ahead and create a folder and put the stitches that you want to use in there. The first thing I'm doing is a little zigzag, and what this does is it just gives a little bit of a finish to your project, and it gives it a little bit of stabilization. And you do want this folded over twice because you really need that to get the results that you want. Now when you're doing this, I've got my zigzag set at a 4.0. You might adjust that a little bit, that's your choice. And you want the right swing of the needle to just barely go off your fabric. So I'm just stitching along. I'm using a decorative stitch foot because that allows the zigzag, which is close together, to slide under the foot. So I am at a 4.0 wide and a 2.0 length, and I'm just going to go ahead and finish that zigzag along this edge. So now what we want to do is choose a decorative stitch. There are lots of decorative stitches that will work, but this is my favorite one. So let's take a look at it on the screen. I don't even know how to describe it. That's why we just kind of have to look at it on the screen. This is the one that I like, and I am set at a 6.0 width and a 7.0 length. Now when we're stitching this, we want this part of the stitch here to go into the previous row of stitching. So we have to line up our foot appropriately. So I've lined up my foot so the red line of my foot, which is the center, is lined up right at the edge of my zigzag. And that's going to take a nice big bite into here, and it's going to allow me to practice my lineup. Now get in the habit of always touching pattern start if you can, and that means that your stitch will always start at the beginning. So we'll go ahead and we'll stitch this. And like I said, you want to keep that red center line. I should have used a different color, but this red center line is lined up right with the edge of my foot. And if you look way back here at the needle, you'll see it's going way into my zigzag. And that's what I want, because I want this to stay together. I don't want to take a chance on it falling apart. Now you can notice that I'm not going very slow. I'm not flooring it either, but you can go at a pretty good clip on this and just stitch all the way from one end to the other. Well, our first row is finished, and you can see that those stitches formed just beautifully for this project. Now once we wash this, it's not going to look like this at all. It's going to kind of shrink up, and the stitches are going to be much more compact. What we want to do now is stitch the second row, and we want and let's look at the screen again, we want this bottom part of the stitch, or the left swing of the needle, to go into our previous row of stitching. Now some people are going to tell you to try to line up each of these, I'm going to call them scallops, they're really not scallops, but each of these little scallops, they're going to tell you you have to line it up exactly one inside the other. I'm going to show you a trick that allows you to not have to be quite so precise on that, because I find that very difficult to do. And I like to sew, and I like to make it easy, so I'm going to share that with you. But I am going to recommend that you touch your pattern start if you have it. Go ahead and you're going to line it up, and you have to find what's comfortable for you. So my center red line is just a hair inside of this stitch, and I'm just going to go ahead and stitch, keeping, I kind of vacillate between, let me stop and show you, there's two red lines on here, the center one, and there's one that we sometimes call half right. So I try to keep this rounded edge of my stitch between the center and the half right. And I'm just going to stitch the next row of stitching. All right, well, we have our zigzag, then we have 2 rows of stitching. Now I promised you a secret to help you not worry if these weren't lined up exactly right. And what that is to do a little straight stitch. So remember I said if you have a folder to go ahead and put your stitches in a folder, because we're going to be bouncing back and forth. So I've called up a straight stitch, and my straight stitch is in the center needle position, and it's at a 1.5 length. Now what I want is I want that straight stitch to go right at the top of the first row and the bottom of the second row, right where those overlap. And I'm going to give you a hint. When you're doing your first one, don't use red thread, because it blends in with the red line on your foot. But I can see the red line very well from where I am. I'm not sure if it shows up on the camera, but I'm doing this little tiny straight stitch right where those 2 rows meet. Once I have that straight stitch finished, I'm going to go back to my decorative stitch, stitch row 3, then go back to my straight stitch and stitch in between. Then I'll go back to the decorative stitch, stitch row 4, and when we get to row 4, I'll be back. All right. Well, the one thing that I want to remind you, or I may not have told you yet, is don't use your thread clips. Go ahead and pull out a tail and clip with the scissors, and that gives you a little bit, it just makes everything work a little bit better. The other thing is start with a full bobbin, because you don't want to have to stop in the middle of a row and redo and try to line things up. This is a very thick thread, so you don't want to be going back over anything. Do not tie off at the beginning and the end. Again, you don't want that to bunch up and cause a bird's nest or anything on your machine. This is thick thread, so we have to use a few different rules than we normally do. So I stitched decorative stitch, straight stitch, then a decorative stitch, then a straight stitch, then a decorative stitch, and I just finished a straight stitch on this row. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch a straight stitch right at the top of my final row. So 4 rows of decorative stitches with a straight row of straight stitching in between, and then we'll be ready to make this into a little bag, put it in the washer to wash out the stabilizer, and when we get it out, it'll be finished. So I'm going to do my straight stitch right now. Well, once you have all your stitching done, then you're going to remove the excess stabilizer from the bottom here. Don't get too close. You want to make sure not to cut your stitches, and you want to make sure not, excuse me, not to cut your fabric. And you also want to remove the excess stabilizer from the top. And remember, this is a water-soluble stabilizer, and I had 4 layers just to make sure that it was stabilized sufficiently. Now I'm going to fold this in half. I'm going to line up my bottom row of stitching. I want that to line up really nice and neat when it's finished. And if you had a serger, you could go ahead and serge this together if you wanted. But I'm just going to go ahead and do it with a zigzag, because not everybody has a serger. So I've just pulled up the zigzag that I used in the beginning. So it's a 4.0 and a 1.5. And I'm going to stitch from the top down to the end of my lace, and then reverse up and then come back down. And that way I know that this little bit of the lace is really secured and it's not going to unravel. So I've threaded with regular thread in the needle and the bobbin, and I want this to be close to the end, close to the edge. So I'm just going down, and then I'm going back up, and then down one more time, and then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch all the way down this side and then across the bottom, and then this bag will be ready to be rinsed out, and we'll see how it turns out.